This afternoon we're going to have later on a ceremony for Christy McDonald, who will be receiving Jukai, what's called Jukai, or the 16 Precepts. And it's just, I like to say that it's just another way of taking this practice of Buddhism, in particular Sokuzan orientation, which is just a way of practicing the Buddhist teachings, that everything is dependently arisen. And I like to say it is kind of like glue. You're trying to practice this, and you can feel that you keep kind of maybe wandering away, and then you come back and recommit yourself or dedicate yourself to it. And it's sometimes that's enough. You don't need to do anything else. It doesn't even might not even come up for you. But if it does come up, then you might think, well, some other people are receiving the Bodhisattva precepts, which maybe I should do that too. And if you come to me and ask me about it, if you're on a fence about it, even if you're not on a fence about it, I'll probably send you packing, so to speak. Go think about it some more, reflect on it, see if you really want to do this. Because these precepts, the main one that basically is quite threatening to your ego, is the third of the 3 pure precepts. There's the first of 3 refuges. Refuge in the Buddha is the example of someone who is sane. Refuge in the Dharma is the truth that he taught. Refuge in the Sangha as the community of people, in the old days, monks. These days, just people who are studying the Buddhist teachings. I take refuge in that. You say, I'm no longer going to, the refuge vows, I'm no longer going to be dedicated to the worldly pursuit of getting ahead of everybody else, of the 8 worldly dharmas: success and failure, praise and blame, winning and losing, all those. You can find a lot of those dharmas. So we're refugees from that. We're going to use the Buddha as the example, read about the Buddha, read the Buddha's teachings, read the teachings of the Buddhist masters down through the centuries, the ones that seem to have realized what he realized, their Buddha nature. So we're going to take refuge in that, take refuge in the Dharma, the truth that he taught. Everything is dependently arisen. So we're refugees from samsara, from the plus and minus, war and peace, picking and choosing, all of the polarities that magnetize us this way and make us have aversion to everything else. Refuge in the Sangha, the community of people who are studying this, which is difficult because the community of people who are studying this may not be people that you have picked for your personal friends, because personal friends are people who, as I sometimes say, and have said before and will say now, are people that, even though they can see how crazy you are, how mistaken you are, and how twisted you are, and I can think of a lot of other things, but they love you anyway. And you're on this similar frequency, and you kind of fuel each other's delusion, but not in a particularly negative or evil way. So people that are your spiritual friends, the people in the Sangha, and the teaching person is your spiritual friend, or as the Sanskrit has it, Kalyana Mitra, or companion in the virtue. This person is going to help you fundamentally. This person is going to not interfere with your spiritual path, which is pretty fundamental. In other words, they're not going to support your delusion, which is interfering with your spiritual path. Nor are they necessarily going to come down on you and criticize you, which would be interfering with your own innate intelligence and Buddha nature. It takes a lot of patience to sit right and look at somebody that is really confused and not point it out to them. You can do that much easier if it's an 8-year-old and you're a mom. Anybody have any 8-year-olds? Does anybody want an 8-year-old? I'll go get you one. So those kinds of things function all different ways. But it's difficult. It's challenging, and that's the great part of the sangha, is you're actually with people who are your spiritual friends, people who are one of their primary things. If they're studying this, their primary understanding, feeling about life is to find out what is this fundamentally about? What does this mean? And they're using the Buddhist teachings, which go back 2,500 years, as a kind of feeling or dynamic or structure to explore this more deeply, using sitting practice of meditation. Seems to show up quite differently for everyone. Some people are right away, they want to get in as deeply as they can. Chezan, who's a monk, lives at the temple, was 26, and he came to me 4 years ago, and that was the first words out of his mouth. I want to be a monk. Said, you're only 22, you want to be a monk? You don't even know what a monk is. I didn't say that to him, of course, but I probably scowled, and I've been scowling at him ever since, when it's appropriate. And so some, depending on karma, depending on causes and conditions, my function as a teacher is to meet people where they're at insofar as I can. And it's much different than it would be in ancient China, Japan, where everyone in this room would probably be a monastic, with maybe one or two people out in the community who would be interested in what was going on. And now it's the other way around. It's hardly everyone is looking at this because they want to be happy, they want to be sane, and this looks like something that they might want to proceed with. When I was in Japan, I was at the family temple, Koben, my teacher Koben Roshi, and my teacher Kaben. Hojo-sama was the name of his, that was given to him as the temple, head of the temple, the abbot. He wasn't an abbot because it wasn't a monastery, but it was a family temple. There were 600 families came there, and I only saw half a dozen while I was there. They donated, they completely supported everything. He drove a 7 or 8 year old Mercedes, so he was doing okay. My son, Mason, lived there for a couple of years and functioned as a monk, and he's of course still a monk. He's in Nepal now. And it's just interesting, the whole cultural situation, how here we have people who are not necessarily wanting to be monastics, but want to study these teachings. And so the Jukai is something that we offer, and it's actually offered there also, that you can take lay precepts, or ask for lay precepts, the 16 precepts, the 3 refuge vows, the next 3 are the pure precepts. Very simply put, vow to do good things, pretty easy. Don't do harm to yourself or anyone else. That's, in some translations, it's quite extensive how that all looks. And then the other one that I like, and this is the translation I like the most, is be with all things. This is the Bodhisattva vow, to be with all things. It's also translated as save all beings, starting with your own thought patterns. Anything that arises, do not kill it. Starting with your own thought patterns. Don't do away with anything, unless you can't help it. So be with all things. That's the Bodhisattva vow in this tradition. And then the rest of them are the 10 prohibitory precepts, which I'm not going to go into detail on that, but it's basically not to kill, not to steal, not to say things that aren't true, not to do all the other things, talk about people behind their back and all those things. And they're called grave precepts or prohibitory precepts, but they're not actually things to be obeyed. They're the way this is handled or worked with in this tradition, and my understanding of it is you see the way in which you can't quite do any of those. You can't. There's no way you can not lie. We're always lying. Every time you open your mouth, you lie. It's always a half-truth. I'm not saying it doesn't have its relative element, but quite often we miss because we're so intent upon judging and evaluating and making sure that we're good, making sure that we're doing this right. Well, at least we're right. So, which is reinforces self-centeredness, ego, narcissism. The seventh consciousness, as it's talked about in the Yogacara tradition. So in order to do this, you, in this relationship to this teacher, you would ask, and then I would say no. Or I would make, what I'm doing is really making sure that you really want to do this, because you're actually saying, I'm going to put everyone else before myself. And that's hard to do. It's impossible to do that. As long as there's any self anywhere. The practice of doing that is to see how you can't do it. It's to see how you keep going back to me, me, me. Me and how I feel, and I'm right, and this is how this looks, and this is, you know, and they're wrong. So it's very difficult to completely, and from the point of view of ego, it's completely ridiculous to do that. Why would you do that? Why would I give up my wonderful self for all these idiots? Not you guys. But the extreme of it is like that. It's like you're with somebody that you know is completely mistaken, and yet you need to function in some way to give them the benefit of the doubt. Actually allow them to be genuine, allow them to give them the space to see that for themselves rather than point it out to them. So at some point, if you're absolutely insistent that this is what you want to do, then I would probably, I have turned somebody down 4 or 5 times over a period of a long time. And they eventually didn't do it at all. Once I said, okay, then they stopped and they left. They weren't interested anyway. They were interested in manipulating me on some level. And I could kind of see that, but then I think it was time to let them do that. So no mistake was made. There's still that dynamic needs to actually work its way out. There's no person who's right and someone else who's wrong. There seems to be a quality of clarity on one side and delusion on the other. That can happen, but that can flip really easy. As it is sometimes said, from beginningless time, every single being you have met has been your mother. So it may be necessary for you or not. As I sometimes say, I'm not here to promote anything. In some lineages, the teaching person will say, it's time you took precepts, or it's time you became a monk. They've even done that in our tradition, so it's not unusual. Teaching person just functions differently. Not wrong, just not something I'm about to do. I don't need a large group of monks that aren't really sure about what they want to do. Yes?
In the way the Bodhisattva Shanadeva says that one who vows to save all beings, but then turns around and says, no, I'm not going to, is such a huge karmic misfortune because he's living down every sentient being.
Yeah.
So my question is it possible once you take Jukai to renounce that vow and turn back?
Not the Bodhisattva vow. Refuge vow, yes. You can turn away from that because it's a provisional situation. But the Bodhisattva vow is actually, you've said, you've received, you're observing a vow where you're giving up on your self-centeredness. You're giving up on that attachment. So you can't go back. You might go on one hell of a detour. You could go on some, but once you receive that vow, this is just the way it's talked about. And in the 9th century, Shantideva, in his Way of the Bodhisattva, talks about that. Talks about a lot of things in there about the way of working with this. And it doesn't mean that he's always correct about everything, even though he was a sage and was probably enlightened. But we just use it as guidelines. Buddhism is not about believing this and disbelieving that. We look at it. These are all. Anytime you put anything into words, it's going to start to shift and change over time. There's a fly in your nose.
I'm letting him come to me.
Oh, good. Good approach. So the idea with receiving the vow, or is just like the word I always use, is like glue. I want to do this, I understand this, I've studied this, I've looked at these precepts, and this looks like something I want to do. And usually it's choiceless. You don't have, if there's any kind of a vacillation, and I see that, or you tell me that, then I'm not going to, if you want to continue, you might have to go somewhere else, because I'm not going to go along with that. Yes, Jim?
What does it glue to?
It glues the whole matrix we call a living being, which includes your ego, the part of you that you think is somebody that is completely unreal. So you have a sense that it's unreal, but then it's scary. So then you look around and you see, well, here's a way that maybe I could train with the help of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Maybe I could train my mind to do this, and maybe my higher self, higher aspiration, deeper feeling, deeper self, Buddha nature, if you want to call it that. Buddha nature is right, it's shining through you all the time. You either see it or you don't. If you see it, then there's no problem with anything. This doesn't mean that you let people take advantage of you. You know, it doesn't mean just because you see we're not separate, doesn't mean that you can necessarily be taken advantage of because you're kind of suddenly you're a bodhisattva wimp. So the glue would be, it could show up different for each person. It probably would feel different for each person. I call it glue because that's how it was for me. It was both a choice and it was choiceless. It was kind of a choice, but it was really choiceless. It kind of haunted me for a long time. Yes?
Well, it seems like a choice. It seems choiceless to me. So the glue doesn't quite.
Well, then it's not for you. At least not at this point.
Well, we can talk about that.
Yeah,
well,
keep coming.
I mean, it's choice. To me, it's choiceless.
It is.
To me, that the 16 precepts are the way to.
Yeah, and you can observe the 16 precepts without receiving any vows. You don't need the vow. It's just that those of us who are weaker.
Oh, I'm weaker.
Yeah. No, that's not. I'm just saying that it's very individual. It's there if you want to proceed in that way. And it's after you do that, you think, well, now what has that done? Well, there's something changes about it. There's some kind of a attitude. I think a change. There's a change of name. I would give you, or the preceptor would give you another name, and then even I received refuge vows from Trungpa Rinpoche in 1975. But in those days, he didn't require that anybody use their name, so very few people did. And I received bodhisattva vows, which are given separately in that tradition in 1980. And no one was using their name. I thought it might be a good idea, but I was too self-conscious to do that. I didn't want to change my name or start using, because it seemed too presumptuous. I'm kind of special because I have a Buddhist name, and this happens now. I mean, it happens if somebody changes their name to some other name that sometimes might strike us as being a little bit phony. But I think it's necessary to step through that and use that change of name. The change of name is part of it. There's something called change of mark. That means that you're just less warlike, more likely to just cave, be with things as they are, rather than always be insisting or being upset about everything. That you could say that you take responsibility for your own. You allow emotions to come and go without going like that. You allow emotions to come and go without going like that. Blaming. You can't find the first cause for anything. Just that discovery is quite liberating and allows you to actually experience the negativity that happens in the world, in anybody's karma, and all the countless numbers of lives that we've all been a part of, down through beginningless time. So change of name. In our tradition, not in all traditions, but in ours, you actually sew, called nyohoe. You sew a raksu, you sew one of these small representations of the Buddha's robe, and it's has about 500 stitches in it, somewhere in that area. You have the help of our wonderful sewing teacher. What's your name? Kyozan? No. Is it Kyozan? You gotta look and read what her name is. Kyozan. Mirror Mountain. Sunlit cloud. So we use unyo, it means sunlit cloud. You can see, if you talk to her, you can see the sunny part, you can see the cloudy part. Gotcha. So, and then, it may seem a little weird or a little phony, especially in the West. We think, no, I'm going to have a Buddha name. What am I going to do with that? What are my friends going to say when I start calling myself? What will they say about? What will they think about what I'm thinking about what they're thinking? That kind of thing. So what we do is I help you there. I say, if you're in the monastery, if you're in the temple, or if you're in a Buddhist situation like this, go by that name. The rest of the time, go by your regular name. But while you're in this situation, Kozan, what was it again? Unyo. And then some people have Buddhist names from other, like Chijang has a different, Jigme has a different name from a different teacher, or has received refuge vow. And so we can use that too. And it's just it just changes the dynamic a little bit. I don't know, I think it's probably different for everyone, but probably helpful. And so then you would sew one of these, and then the teaching person would write on the back, write your name, and just kind of a symbol, and then you would put this on and say something before you put it on, and then you do the robe chant, it's called takasage, before you put it on. Just to kind of ritualize it so that there's something, some kind of form that is meaningful, meaningless in the relative world of samsara, but completely meaningful in this world of transcendence, which is actually a spiritual realm. So this afternoon, what, 4 o'clock? 4 o'clock. That's the end of Christy's personal life. No more ham and eggs. No more. Just total devotion to the human beings everywhere, which she also tries to do already, tries to help people. So that's always the case. So it's just more of it, and there's just, like you could say, more glue. I don't know if you think about it as glue, do you? No. So more of that, more of a connection with a teaching person, in this case this guy, and more of a connection with other people with the ordained sangha, and more connection with the form, using the forms not to manipulate anybody, to create some kind of a crazy cult or anything. People are free. There's no prison anywhere. You're free to. The forms are to be observed. There's a big difference between following a rule and observing a form. Even killing. You observe how you can't help but kill something. Of course, we want to kill as little as possible, but watch and don't tell a story about it. Like, don't necessarily go in and say, well, I only kill things that don't have mommies. Like it's okay to kill something living as long as it doesn't have eyes or a mother. So You can kind of see what that's about. If someone's saying, okay, I'm just going to stop looking at that. I'm just going to, I'll always know, there's always a stamp on it. Has a mother, doesn't have a mother. I can eat it, I can't eat it. So that limit, what that does is it does away with your own personal responsibility, intelligence of relating to everything as it comes to you. Because there's going to be a time when you are going to meet living beings that have no mother. Perhaps, yes.
How is a rock suit different than a merit badge?
It can function like a merit badge or like a sign of, something, but that's more for you to work with. So there's a difference. It would show up different. Some people attach a lot of pride to that, but that's just to be seen, to be worked with. We're not trying to get rid of anything. We're trying to be aware. And the causes and conditions that arise as pride or as self-centeredness or as whatever may happen is just to be observed, not necessarily objected to, agreed with, or shut down on. The three poisons: passion, aggression, and ignorance. So it could, to some people, it may be used as that. I mean, you can kind of feel it if that occurs. More? Yes.
If it didn't occur, and the outside world starts to sense or label apathy to your lack of those events.
What's the question?
What do you do?
Don't do anything. Just notice the apathy. The world is completely crazy. Samsara, which is the Sanskrit word for circular. Life and death. I like it, I don't like it. Peace and war, or war and peace, war and peace. Constant buying into separation, buying into success, buying into failure, buying into being ahead of someone else, buying into separation. Someone labeling apathy, let the labeler do whatever they want to do with it. More.
But there's still emotion.
Where?
We're talking about the Roxy right now.
Yeah.
Happiness when you put it on, or a sense of pride that you are
doing that.
That's, you notice that, and that's there.
Of course.
So
Don't do anything.
Your end goal isn't apathy.
Don't do anything with it. Just observe the way your own emotions rise and fall around things. And look at and as you do this, see if there's a self behind that. See if there's a solid being behind anything. Identity is discontinuous. Ego does not want it to be that way. It wants to suck up into a me that is winning, or a me that is losing, or a me that is apathetic. But some kind of identity that is a certain way. Yes.
Even the non-identity finds pleasure in the now.
I don't know. You just made a statement.
Does.
That used to be a soap back in the 50s. Does everything. Yes.
Does the enlightened dude still experiences those emotions?
Yes.
So they're not necessarily bad if you have a sense of pride, just as long as you're aware of it.
Yeah. What happens is that over time, if you stop fighting with everything, pride, you stop fighting with any of that. You just no longer, this just stops happening. And it stops happening because you don't add on to passion, aggression, and ignorance. You just see passion, you see ignorance, ego wants to get rid of those so that it can have a credential of being enlightened or higher than or better than. But realization is seeing there is no being. So therefore the pride can arise, but it can't find anybody to be proud. It can't find a being. But the being, the consciousness, the spiritual quality of awakening still sees suffering. So, but it's not an entity. It's Buddha nature. Your Buddha nature actually sees. And Buddha nature doesn't belong to anyone. Just like a consciousness does not belong to anyone.
If the pride finds action, or takes action, it expresses, then is there a separate being?
There could be. Probably wouldn't have a lot of energy. Because it's just about, it needs to be somebody who's having the pride. The pride, self-existing pride, or just pride that just arises, is threatening. If there's self-centeredness happening, then that self-centeredness wants to stop that pride. I don't want to be proud. I can't do that. Or the one who wants that or feels that, then that triggers more of the self-centeredness and more of the identity. So ego is discontinuous and unreal, but it seems real when something comes along and triggers it. Go ahead.
So there isn't necessarily a distinction between awareness of pride, say, and awareness of within an expression of pride. If pride expresses, is there a difference? Is there a difference between just having awareness of it without taking action, without having it be expressed?
Well, that could happen. There might not show up at all. That might happen. Might hang around for a while. Might fade away. It might come in for a while. But if there's no solid grasping or belief in a separate being who can win or lose, or a being who can have something to be proud of, there's some kind of identity, then it's just and who knows for sure, but it's probably just the causes and conditions that are constantly arising everywhere, through everything. It's so very, very complicated. But once the self-centeredness or the solid being has been seen through, then everything is welcome. Everything, pride can come along, anger, warfare, even warfare. You might not care for it, but it might enter your particular situation, and then you would not add any more warfare to it. You wouldn't necessarily go to war with the war, or you might. This is why it's difficult to set up a thing. Well, if you were enlightened, this would always happen, or that would always happen, or enlightened people are always peaceful. Maybe not. So trying to find some kind of right back to kind of we're looking for a guarantee of something, or some kind of, some kind of something. We're doing something and we want to know, are we right? Is this right to do this? Should I be doing this? Where do you get your authority from? Just like my teacher, Kobun Roshi, is Zen, a Buddhist meditation master, who died in 2002. Said, get your own authority. So he wasn't necessarily empowering ego, but actually seeing that only you see what's here. No one else sees this. We're always imputing an other. And it's not saying there isn't something going on, but it is not an other. Just like this is not a self. And not solid. Discontinued, yes.
No, not just.
Okay. Further questions?
Trungpa Rinpoche actually disrobed in order to, or I guess I can assume why he did it, but seemingly to meet other beings, the Westerners, where they're at. But we're adorning the Raksu to meet other beings. Does the Raksu also separate us and put a film of projection?
Just enough so you can concentrate on your practice. So when he took off his robe, my understanding was, as he said, to come down off his high horse and meet people where they were at, because they were not doing. He could see that they were projecting so much on him that he couldn't actually communicate with them. It was this great tulku. You know, I wouldn't have come anywhere near him had he had robes on, because in 1973, I was way too intimidated by people who were monks. But he smoked cigarettes, drank sake, and wore a golf shirt, and had a lot of bushy black hair, and also wrote a book that I really admired, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. So he was approachable. He was sitting there smoking a cigarette. You know, you didn't feel intimidated by him. Later on, I got intimidated. Once I realized who I was looking at, then it was extremely intimidating. But at first it wasn't. Because my projections onto him was, I think I'll hang out with this Tibetan guy for a while and see what he has to say.
Sokuzan, why did you find him intimidating?
Because the more I talked to him, the more I could see that I could see, or I sensed, or maybe it was just my own paranoia, that he could see right through me. He could see all the neurosis that was happening with me that I was trying to hide from him. And that was me. I'm not saying everyone's trying to do that or was trying to do that with him. But I didn't want him to see how crazy I was. I didn't want him to see how self-centered I was and how vain I was. I didn't want him to see that. It was embarrassing. So I was caught between a rock and a hard place. I wanted to be there and I wanted to leave. I wanted to be there and I wanted to leave. I needed to be there and I needed to leave. Somehow I stayed. Probably because I'm lazy. Too tired to run away. Yeah. And it would change. It would go through different stages. I got, the more went through those stages, and then the more I felt like I really needed to get his help, the more I was able to relax a little bit and go in and ask him in interviews specific questions that were very helpful to me. I didn't waste my time with him at all chatting. I went in and asked him questions that were really important to me, and I got answers that I didn't expect, but were very helpful to me. Personal kind of stuff.
How does one waste the teacher's time?
I was talking about wasting my time. Going in and knowing that I only had so much time, and there was he had lots of students. He was famous, you know, pretty famous. When I met him, he had several hundred students, and then by the time he passed away in 1987, he had thousands. So he was pretty charismatic, and his teachings were really powerful teachings. If you read Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, it's just an amazing book, which we study every Tuesday in SokukoJi. So I don't think you can waste the teacher's time.
So your students don't waste your time?
Let me see. No. It's always a mutual thing. There's no waste of anything. I don't feel that way. They may feel that way after they've talked to me and think, boy, that was a great 15 minutes. I'm not going to see that guy again. Further questions about this topic? Jukai? Gary?
You said to study, all 16.
Mm-hmm.
Is that memorize or truly look into what they mean, or both?
I think it depends. It's up to you. You might memorize them. I don't want to do too much with it because it's you have this, and then you look at it. And then I think the most important one to look at in there is be with all things. All the rest of them are, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. But if you really look at those, you'll see that you're always killing something, somewhere. You're always, you can't actually completely say the truth. And we're always taking things that haven't been given to us. I have to look really close to see it.
Does be with all things mean, does it start with yourself?
Yeah, that's why we sit down, face the wall, and be with that. That's where you practice it at. You sit down and hold still. Whatever happens, don't object, don't agree, don't look away. Don't object, aggression. Don't agree, passion. Don't look away. Do nothing with it. Let it take its own form and notice that everything is impermanent. You can't see the impermanence if you're doing anything with it. But if you're not doing anything with it, then it just comes up and it melts. Comes up and it melts. Or it's born, it lives a little while, and it dies. Thoughts do that. Question?
So if you can't keep or obey or adhere to the precepts, like no killing, then how are they helpful?
Awareness. Just to see more closely the way in which you function in the world, and see that help you see that it really isn't any solid self anywhere, and no solid other. That all the tension and warfare and polarity in the world is all based on fear. I'm afraid something's going to happen that we don't want to happen, or that we're losing control, or all kinds of variety. So we observe those to help us tune into those, and one may be more important to you than others. But once you start to understand those, you don't even have to look at them. They're happening all the time. Something's arising that you don't care for, you don't do anything with it. You don't necessarily fight with it or object to it. Or if you do, then you watch how that happens. More?
So if we study the precepts, are they best studied ahead of time, or do you apply them situationally?
I think both. I think it's very, very individual. I think they're available. It's not something, I don't know if it's on the website or not, but it could be something that someone could look at. These are the 16 precepts, and this is how they look. And there's people have different ways of, if you go on and Google 16 precepts, Bodhisattva precepts, you'll find all different kinds of translations of this. And I'm not saying I disagree, but there's ones that I like better than others. So different ways of talking about it. More? So you might find that one that is interesting is no lying. To really take that precept and look at it and see if you're always being genuine. If you're always saying the very subtle shades of not being exactly honest with yourself. And you may discover that you're just this wonderful, honest person. But you say, well, that doesn't apply to me. I don't know. Further questions? Raquel?
When you, going back to our apathy question, well, different question, when you find yourself not having those reactions, how do you know you're not becoming apathetic?
I wouldn't worry about it. Trying not to be apathetic is more like as a concern about your identity, about how you appear, not just to others, but to yourself. You don't want to be an apathetic person, which is ego. It's a way of working with identity that is the self is based in a just kind of an assumption that there is somebody. There isn't anybody. But don't take my word for it. Look, see if you can find a solid person somewhere. When you feel apathy come up, find out who's apathetic. If you find pride coming up, see if you can find a person that has pride or is creating pride.
I have a question.
Yes.
And so in the way we say the precepts, I vow to be of benefit, vow to cause no harm, vow to be with all things. What is a vow?
It's just I'm just saying I'm going to do this. Just like when we do when we admit or say our, which Christy will do, we'll say, I can't remember how it reads, but there's several different translations of that. Just acknowledging from beginning of time, I've done a whole lot of things that weren't so helpful. Not apologizing for that, but just acknowledging that that's occurred. Not setting up a thing, here, I'm going to apologize so I no longer have to think about that anymore. Or I get off the hook, or, I forgive you. That's why apology and forgiveness doesn't really work very well. It's a little sneaky. And it affirms some kind of apologizer and some kind of forgivenizer. Yes.
Doesn't saying I vow do that as well? Strengthen the identity?
Yeah, but the identity is unreal, so it doesn't matter. It's not real. So where it works, you use it, and where it doesn't work, you don't use it.
Same with sitting, observing. Doesn't that sometimes strengthen the identity?
It
that
can.
I'm observing
Yeah.
these things.
It can, but you'll see but because you're doing that, your awareness is on the identity because you're just mentioning it. So you've been watching that, but you'll also notice that identity can't last. It would need constant fueling. And something that is real doesn't need any support. And what is, to take that even further, what is real is never threatened and doesn't need any support from anything. But what is temporary and is an energy sink is ego. Wants everything for itself to keep itself going. We all know beings that are they're so self-centered that they're completely nauseating. What?
We can't think of an example.
I can't think of any examples right away, but yes.
What's the difference between being with all beings and saving all beings?
It's the same.
Same thing. Is one meddling and one's not?
No, it's no meddling. Saving all beings, it just means that if you're with all things, then anything that arises, you're at its service. So you're going to save that. If that being or that situation or that there's an opportunity to work in a way to support someone for 10 minutes, then you will do that. And if there's another situation that arises, like we talked about the cardboard signs, so you sometimes you'll find if you're completely present, you won't have any rationale for why you're helping or why you're not helping. You won't think, well, I'm not gonna help them because they're just gonna use it for drugs, so I'm not gonna give them any money. This is ridiculous. You don't know. You have no idea who you're talking to here. You have no idea who that person is. You either help them or don't help them, but don't turn into a philosopher about it. You might as well be leaving the state. State of confusion, of course.
Sokuzan, if I see that I do harm, and there's a urge or desire to correct that, how would I keep from being the special one and reinforcing ego with that?
Don't worry about it. You can't reinforce something that's not real. If you're seeing that it's not real, then the energy just goes. So it's like you don't have to get rid of your ego. just have to keep looking at it and see that it's not substantial. It's not a self. It's not a self. And when you start, if you look at it enough, eventually there's some kind of a, and there's no guarantee, but there can be some kind of a breakthrough where you begin to see everybody. You see all the suffering that's going on around you. You no longer see a solid being. And it might come up and it might leave. You know, and it goes away. Then it comes back. And I'll try again. See if I can't get the attention of this, whatever this is manifesting here. Daughters of Mara, you're not going to seduce the Buddha back into being a slave of samsara, a slave of confusion. The daughters of Mara came and tempted him and tried to talk him. These are called devils, you know, or demons, Mara. They came and when he attained enlightenment, says, "You didn't really attain enlightenment. You're just making this up. So you really, what are you doing this for? You have a son, you have a wife, you have obligations back at the palace. What are you doing? You know, out here wandering around, wasting your life, trying to be some kind of awakened person." And what did the Buddha do? Anybody know? Yeah, he touched the ground. He said, "How do you know?" And he says, "This earth is my witness." So he got his own authority. And how did he get it? All the way to the center of the earth. It's not just a magical thing, some kind of airy-fairy idea. It's real. And when it happens, you won't have doubts about it. If you have doubts, it hasn't happened. And if you're sure of yourself, it hasn't happened. There isn't any self. There isn't any solid being. So it's unshakable. This earth. Sparsha mudra. Touching, you've seen sitting cross-legged, which I can no longer do. Touching the earth. What an arrogant fellow. Time to end. Time to begin. Yes, Jim.
Will the ceremony be here, or?
I think it's going to be right here, right? Yeah. We're going to stumble up and down these steps.
There's enough dinner for everyone.
Oh, yeah.
If everyone stayed for the ceremony and had dinner after, there's enough.
Yeah. So stay and.
And it's vegetarian and gluten-free.
Cool. And it's yellow, I think. Isn't it yellow? Right? The soup is the yellow color.
It's green.
What's green?
Green.
Oh, it's curry. That's what I meant. So, no more questions? We're all set?
Green.
Green? It's green? Yes.
When spiritual materialism manifests in our Sangha,
Yeah.
how should we meet that?
If you see it, just meet it where it's at, which means you may say something about it, you may not. There's no protocol to say it should be done this way or should be done that way. It's bound to come up because people are working with their own negativity or their own desire to have control or have things their way, or so that's happening with everyone all the time on some level with different people in different ways. So if you see something that you would call spiritual materialism, just keep it in the rearview mirror. I mean, in other words, don't. The idea here is to, as your practice says, saying in your practice, just observe. And if you're really present with whatever's happening, or whatever person is present that manifests whatever they're manifesting, if you're just there, then the environment itself will draw you into action or no action at all. So it's a kind of trusting yourself. It's a kind of getting your own authority. But there's no backup like you're doing this because. If there's any kind of second opinion coming along, fishy, like dead carp.
Does spiritual materialism it seems so magnetic, can it diminish the Sangha, the integrity of the Sangha?
Not if there's awareness. Not if we're just aware, just awareness. Awareness rules. I mean, if there's plenty of awareness happening and we're prioritizing that rather than who's right, who's wrong, who's spiritual and materialistic, who's not, just awareness. There's lots of room. Bigger sky, clouds are not particularly running things. They might look like it for a while, but they won't last. They only get their fuel from warfare or from pushing or pulling, or it's like our whole political system, not to get into politics particularly, but the whole thing is based on right and wrong and right and wrong. It's exhausting. And that way of working with it is circular. Goes up and comes down, goes up and comes down. We're winning and we're losing, we're winning and we're losing, we're winning and losing. It's like a sine wave that goes back in time. Yes.
That brings up a question for me.
Yes.
In life in general, if there is someone that you've looked at it, you've observed it, it keeps coming up, it's annoying you, you think this person is this, and you keep observing it, is it helpful to address that person, or is it helpful to just keep watching it? Because in some way you're just relieving yourself by addressing it.
I think it could be necessary to do that. If you've been looking at it for a while, it just keeps, it's kind of the same thing keeps coming into the room over and over and over, and there's no change at all in it. Then maybe you're actually supporting that circle. So that's possible. So one of the things you could do is find a way to interrupt it that is not warlike or that is soft. One of the things that I told your one of the things that I told when I was talking to your friends there, I said, if you're gonna have difficulty or something, one of the things you can do, a couple can do, is sit down and just sit and look at each other for a few minutes. Don't say anything. Just sit and look. And so, in that way, there more becomes, whoever the person is, can maybe more of a heartfelt connection can show up there. And before you start to talk about it. And then bring up, after you've looked at each other, and actually set it up, I'd like to talk to you about something, and and then make it a formal kind of thing. If this person is a member of the Sangha, you could bow. If they're not, then just sit there for a few minutes. And then so setting up a strong dynamic where there could be some communication around something rather than, because otherwise if you do it casually, kind of off-center, then the whole thing becomes casual, and then they get defensive, and then you get to start explaining. You're not really attacking them. You're just trying to point out something, and it gets very convoluted. But if you sit and start out with lots of space first, it's like looking at a blank page for a while. But as far as giving you some kind of a protocol about how to do it, I would have to know so much about it. I would have to be you, probably, to really know more. Anything else? Very good. Thank you.
Should we go to Kitchener?
Sure.
We don't have should we use the copies, because I don't know if this is going to be mindful and not use the traditional, or could you use the for immeasurable?
Yeah, do that.
Do you have the copies in here?